Okay, so you use the Scrum methodology, but then you blend it with Agile principles, but only the ones that integrate well with the 5-factor personality model, which I promise makes perfect sense. I just got my certificate yesterday.
Welcome back to Fluent Talk, everyone. I'm Sophia, and that clearly is Ava, who just spent the weekend getting a certification for a job that didn't exist 3 years ago. Welcome back, Ava. What magical micro-credential did you just acquire this time?
It's not magic, Sophia. It's focused, practical learning. And it's the perfect intro for today's topic, the future of education. We are debating the biggest question facing young people. Do degrees still matter, or are micro-credentials the new king of the job market?
The answer, honestly, is obvious. The degrees absolutely still matter. A tertiary education, a 4-year degree, proves intellectual stamina. It demonstrates you can think critically, research deeply, and commit to a long-term goal. The long-term return on investment of a university degree extends far beyond just the first job you land.
But that ROI is shrinking fast, especially when you factor in the crippling student loan debt. Why should I spend 4 years and tens of thousands of dollars for generalized knowledge when I can get a targeted micro-credential in 3 months? That certificate proves I have a specific, highly in-demand skill that directly addresses the current skill gap employers constantly complain about.
Does a 3-month certificate truly close that gap, or does it just gloss over it? Micro-credentials provide technical instructions, yes, but they rarely foster the deep critical thinking and ethical grounding that a traditional tertiary education provides. Without that deep foundational knowledge, how will you adapt when the next disruptive technology makes that 3-month skill completely obsolete?
Adaptation is exactly the point. The job market changes every 2 years. Rote learning from a traditional fixed degree cannot keep up. I need to be agile, and micro-credentials allow me to constantly upskill and maintain my market relevance. They offer a much faster ROI in a volatile economy, proving that specialized, flexible skills are now far more valuable than a generalized degree.
The university's role is not just job training, Ava. It's about civic contribution and intellectual maturity. It's about creating citizens who can solve global problems, not just cogs in the corporate machine. That deep, slow learning is simply irreplaceable.
We've established the conflict, degrees versus micro-credentials. Stay with us until the very end to get the full list of today's essential vocabulary. You'll need to know ROI and skill gap to master this debate.
Exactly. And speaking of what's irreplaceable, is that deep learning truly necessary? Next, let's challenge the foundation of traditional schooling, liberal arts versus STEM. Should we stop studying poetry and only focus on coding?
Exactly. And speaking of which, is that irreplaceable deep learning truly necessary? Next, let's challenge the foundation of traditional schooling, liberal arts versus STEM. Should we stop studying poetry and only focus on coding?
That idea is terrifying, Ava. The notion that we should abandon the liberal arts for purely technical STEM fields is a cultural disaster. Critical thinking is arguably the most important skill in any industry, and it is primarily honed through studying history, philosophy, and literature.
But we live in a world driven by tech literacy and data science. The highest paying jobs and the greatest market growth are all in STEM. When automation leads to rapid job displacement in non-technical sectors, those with pure liberal arts degrees are the first to suffer severe economic fallout. Education needs to prioritize future-proofing through technical skills.
You are defining the value of education purely by starting salary. That's an incredibly short-sighted utilitarian view. You forget that the humanities, the liberal arts, teach empathy, ethics, and the ability to understand complex human systems. When AI advances, those are the soft skills that prevent total job displacement and allow humans to manage the machines. That's the real future-proofing.
But you cannot manage the machines if you lack the fundamental tech literacy. We need more engineers, more data scientists, and fewer graduates whose skills are not immediately monetizable. The skill gap is technical, not philosophical. We need to restructure our education system to prioritize STEM to ensure global economic competitiveness and solve global problems, which fundamentally requires science, not poetry.
But who designs the ethical parameters for the AI that those STEM graduates build? Who ensures that the new technology serves the greater human good? That comes from the critical thinking and ethical debate learned through the liberal arts. A society focused purely on technology without a humanistic perspective is doomed to repeat its historical and ethical mistakes.
Are you team liberal arts or team STEM? Let us know. Stay with us until the end. We will define tech literacy, critical thinking, and the harsh reality of job displacement in our vocabulary summary.
The conclusion is clear. We need a functional fusion, but until the education system catches up, students should prioritize STEM for career stability while using the adaptable skills from the liberal arts to ensure professional longevity. The job market is changing too fast to risk a pure humanities degree.
Speaking of the job market changing fast, the biggest threat isn't the degree itself, but the lack of continuous preparation. Next, let's discuss how we can actively combat automation and ensure that no one is left behind in the future of work.
Speaking of the job market changing fast, the biggest threat isn't the major you choose, but the lack of continuous preparation. Next, let's discuss how we can actively combat automation and ensure that no one is left behind in the future of work.
The fight is action. We cannot stop automation, the replacement of human tasks by technology, but we can prepare. The only way to achieve true future-proofing for your career is through continuous reskilling and upskilling. Relying on a degree that you earned 20 years ago simply won't cut it anymore.
That's convenient advice, but you're placing the full burden onto the worker. The inevitability of automation is evidence that the traditional education system failed to prepare people for the real world. Why should a 40-year-old worker who played by all the rules suddenly have to pay and struggle for expensive reskilling just because their job was eliminated by a machine?
The scale of the change is frankly enormous. It's not just assembly lines, it's cognitive labor too. Think about robotic process automation, RPA, replacing basic bookkeeping, or even generative AI replacing junior content raters. If you're not willing to commit to constant upskilling, you are essentially choosing professional obsolescence.
Upskilling and reskilling must be a shared responsibility between corporations and the government. They are the ones who ultimately benefit from the increased efficiency of automation. Asking workers to fully fund their own future-proofing is exploitative. We need subsidized learning programs and guaranteed basic income to provide a vital economic safety net.
While government support would be ideal, relying solely on it is a huge gamble. The fastest way to close the skill gap is for individuals to take ownership. Micro-credentials and online courses make targeted upskilling more accessible than ever before. Maintaining a growth mindset and committing to lifelong learning is the best future-proofing you can possibly achieve.
This topic is vital for everyone's career. Stay with us until the end. We will define crucial terms like automation, reskilling, and future-proofing in our vocabulary summary.
We agree that upskilling is necessary. The debate is about equity. We need to ensure that the tools for reskilling, whether they are degrees or micro-credentials, are accessible and affordable for everyone, not just those who can afford the time and money.
Exactly. And speaking of equity, the foundation of our entire education system, from elementary school onwards, is often deeply unfair. Next, let's challenge the academic assessment system that everyone dreads: standardized testing.
Exactly. And speaking of equity, the foundation of our entire education system from elementary school onwards is often deeply unfair. Next, let's challenge the assessment system that everyone dreads: standardized testing.
Standardized testing creates intense and unnecessary academic pressure. It forces students into rote learning, memorizing without true comprehension, simply to score well on an exam. It fundamentally fails to measure genuine intellectual curiosity. It only measures performance under extreme stress.
But we absolutely require a baseline measurement of fairness. Standardized testing is the only scalable way we have to compare student performance nationally or internationally. It helps identify which schools are failing, and it provides a transparent benchmark essential for the concept of meritocracy, where everyone supposedly has an equal shot at accessing top universities.
That pressure is overwhelming, Ava. The high-stakes nature of standardized testing leads to debilitating academic pressure and anxiety in children. It warps the joy of learning into a fear of failure. It teaches them to do rote learning rather than to think creatively and deeply.
I agree that academic pressure is severe, but if we abolish standardized testing entirely, what do we replace it with? How do employers or universities fairly age the actual competence of candidates? We must have some quantifiable metric to maintain transparency in the system of meritocracy. The problem isn't the test itself, it's the over-reliance on a single flawed metric.
It's not even transparent. These types of exams inherently favor those who can afford expensive private tutoring. That creates educational inequality and severely widens the achievement gap between affluent and underprivileged students. That ultimately is what completely undermines the very notion of meritocracy. Do you think this system is fair? Stay with us. We will define crucial terms like standardized testing, rote learning, and academic pressure in our vocabulary summary.
We need to maintain a system that measures capability, but we must reduce the weight of standardized testing and incorporate more measurements of real-world skills to alleviate academic pressure and dependence on pure memorization.
You hit on the critical point: the inequality created by private tutoring. Next, let's delve into the ethical cost of that expanding practice of private tutoring and the permanent achievement gap it is establishing. You rightly brought up the inequality generated by private tutoring. Next, let's delve into the ethical cost of that rapidly expanding practice of private tutoring and the irreparable achievement gap it is establishing.
Private tutoring is simply a market response to the high competition for limited university spots. As long as the return on investment for a top degree remains high, parents will pay to maximize their child's chances. You can't reasonably blame them for seeking an advantage.
But we must blame the system that allows education to be an unequal battlefield. The massive growth of private tutoring is effectively the privatization of the best educational advantages. It systematically widens the achievement gap between the affluent and the poor, severely undermining educational equity and severely limiting social mobility for the next generation. The system, it creates a cycle of intergenerational educational equity. No, I mean, it deepens the achievement gap where success is determined not by meritocracy, but almost entirely by inherited wealth.
But modern social mobility is increasingly dependent on real-world skills, not just degrees. If private tutoring focuses purely on teaching rote learning for irrelevant standardized testing, it's an inefficient investment. Tutoring should be focused on upskilling in critical skills, not just exam mechanics.
Regardless of the content, the privatization of educational advantage is ethically wrong. It fundamentally violates the principle of educational equity, which states that opportunity should depend on ability, not the size of one's bank account. The investment in private tutoring actively obstructs the ideals of a true meritocracy. This is a very sensitive topic. Who should be held responsible for the achievement gap? Stay with us. We will define crucial terms like educational equity, social mobility, and privatization in the vocabulary summary.
Therefore, the only viable long-term solution is to substantially strengthen the public school system so that the need for parents to rely on private tutoring to achieve educational equity is eliminated entirely.
That is a critical point to end on and a wonderful summary for our intense debate. That concludes the complex topics we've covered today. Now, let's move on to our final segment where we give our listeners the full vocabulary takeaway. That is a critical point to end on and a wonderful summary for our intense debate. That concludes the complex topics we've covered today. Now, let's move on to our final segment where we give our listeners the full vocabulary takeaway.
Exactly. This is your essential list from today's conversation on education and the future of work. Listen closely and make sure these words become part of your professional vocabulary.
First, micro-credentials. These are certifications granted for specific skills or competencies, often earned online over a short, flexible period. Example, she earned a micro-credential in cloud security in 3 months.
Next, liberal arts. This refers to academic subjects like humanities and social sciences that aim to cultivate general intellectual capacities. Example, studying the liberal arts develops crucial critical thinking skills.
Third, automation. This is the use of technology to perform tasks that were previously done by human workers, often seen replacing predictable, repetitive cognitive tasks. Example, automation is rapidly changing the future of the banking sector.
Fourth, standardized testing. This is any test administered and scored in a consistent, predetermined manner, regardless of the location. Example, the high-stakes nature of standardized testing creates intense pressure.
Fifth, educational equity. This is the principle that all students should have fair access to the resources and support they need to succeed academically. Example, funding reform is needed to ensure educational equity.
And finally, social mobility. This is the movement of individuals, families, or groups through a social hierarchy, often meaning improving one's economic or class status. Example, higher education remains a key driver of social mobility.
What a great discussion. Thank you for joining us today and thinking through the future of learning with us. Remember to always be upskilling.
Our final question for you, do you believe standardized testing is necessary for meritocracy, or does the cost of private tutoring make the whole system inherently unfair? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.
Remember to hit that subscribe button. We post a brand new episode with fresh debates and more essential vocabulary every single day at 6 a.m. on the English Easy channel.
We'll see you next time. Keep learning.